Hello and welcome to Note to File, a clinical research podcast.
A collection of interviews, candid commentary, and general nonsense for the clinical research community.
Check us out at notetofilepodcast.com.
And now, without further ado, on to the show.
Hey guys, welcome to another Note to File Live. I love to play a nice somber song to get the crowd jazzed for another exciting show. Denali, how's it going?
It's going. It is going. It's going pretty well. How about you?
Very good. Very super.
Super.
All right. We're happy today. Welcome our guest, Dr. Brad Hall. Dr. Hall, how you doing?
I'm great. It's great to speak with you both. Normally I would say you can call me Brad, but maybe that's a little confusing since we both have the same name.
It's also BH, like two BHs. What's your middle name start with?
It's Jordan, so I'm BJH.
Oh, okay, very nice. All right, I'm a Bradley Paul myself, so
okay, has a nice ring to it.
There, it works. It works. Very cool. Well, just jump in like we do with all our guests, if you would. I'm always curious, and I think it's always it's kind of fun because everybody comes into the field in a very different way. So, tell us a bit about your background and kind of what brought you into the clinical trial space, if you would.
Sure. So, as you alluded to, my name is Brad Hall. I'm the founder of a company called Senge, and Senge is a clinical research organization that specializes in investigator-initiated trials in eye care. So my background is I'm a vision scientist by trade. So I got my PhD in vision science in 2014. I got my first taste of clinical research during graduate work. So we did a study where we took contact lenses from participants and we checked to see what microorganisms were on top of them.
What did you find?
Yeah, I don't know if I want to know that. I wear contacts.
So, you have bacteria on your skin.
Of course.
And so mostly what we found was the same bacteria that's on your skin. But one participant who swam in their contact lenses, and you're not supposed to swim in your contact lenses. I don't know if you've been told that, but they had some nasty bugs on their contact lenses.
Okay, so it's good. It's a good takeaway. Sorry, keep going.
No, it's
making
it's
a personal note.
But yeah, so after graduate work, I did my next foray into clinical research was doing some consulting work for a startup. So I got some experience on the sponsor side of things, and it was certainly eye-opening being on the sponsor side of things. And a little bit later, I also did some consulting work for a CRO who was doing large FDA trials. So I got some experience that way on the CRO side. But for the last 7 years or so, my main focus has been investigator-initiated trials.
Very good. So when I hear investigator-initiated trials, I tend to think academic centers, places that have sort of all the infrastructure to help do that. Would you say that? I mean, is that accurate? Is it still pretty much do a majority of trials, investigator-initiated trials, still happen in academic centers? I guess kind of tell me what what the ecosystem looks like in terms of IITs.
Sure. At least in eye care, actually, most IITs are done in private practice. I think, I think that is a perception that IITs are mainly for academics or they're for big pharma companies, but actually, private practice individuals are very well positioned to do investigator-initiated trials. For one, in my experience, I think I write about it in a book we might talk about in a little bit. But institutions could take a long time for something like IRB approval. So in the example I give, I think it was 6 months or 12 months before the IRB had even come back with comments on the submission, and that was at an institution. Whereas for IITs in private practice, we can get IRB approval in 2 weeks. So it's much quicker that way.
Yeah, that makes sense, and very much mirrors my previous experience in academia, where you're waiting that long just to even get the corrections you have to make to then resubmit it, all over again. And I think again I work with a lot of private practices, and been approached about doing potentially investigator-initiated trials. I think and even for me, not having the infrastructure that academia has, it makes it like a challenging proposition. But at the same time, to your point, I think just as industry is sort of trying to get into these quicker, easier to work with community sites, it makes a lot of sense that more investigator-initiated trials would start to happen in that environment.
Yeah, for
But
sure. I mean, private practices, they're also, day to day in the grind, seeing patients. They're exposed to a lot of real world conditions. And so they're, they have a lot of experience with patients, and they can offer a lot of value for clinical running their own clinical trials.
So talk to me a little bit about how like you started this. Like you did some consulting, you worked in different sort of areas, and then you're like, hey, like did like this I see a need. Like how did that sort of come about where you're like, hey, I'm gonna do this and this is what I'm gonna do? Like what happened?
So I met an individual waiting in line to board a plane at an airport, and and
Okay.
they were doing this work, and they needed some help
Okay.
with some of the research aspects that they were doing. In that, when you write an academic paper, part of what you have to do is a lit review. So you go and research and find a bunch of papers that are
Yeah.
written on that topic. So they asked me to help them with that, and a little bit of writing, and they enjoyed the work that I did. So we worked together for quite a while, and then they wanted to retire. So as they were retiring, they started referring some of their clients to me, and they were kind enough to mentor me on and teach me what they knew about running investigator-initiated trials. So that's how I got my feet wet, and I really quite enjoy working with investigators who, as I mentioned, are on the front line. They see patients day to day. They have a lot of interesting insights on patient care, and can take research in many different directions. So it's I really quite like working with investigators.
So how do you classify your like are you a CRO for IITs or like what like three letter acronym do you like?
I would probably
yourself?
describe my company as a boutique CRO with a
Okay.
focus on IITs in eye care specifically.
Okay.
So eye care is my background, so I tend
Yep.
to focus on eye care.
Yeah. And do you do anything else besides ophthalmology, or is it just all like sticking to what you know, all eye care?
It's all eye care because my background is vision science. So
Right.
I do enjoy eye care because that's what I did my graduate studies on, and having that experience, I feel like I can offer the most value in eye care as well,
Right.
versus trying to pivot to a different therapeutic area. There's a lot to know for sure.
Yeah.
It takes at least for a PhD, it takes 4 years, to get a PhD. So it took a lot of time to learn a new therapeutic area, I feel like.
Yeah, that makes especially in somewhere where like you're helping to like run the trial, you really need that therapeutic area knowledge. It's not just operations. There's other components of it, which makes sense.
Yeah,
Mm.
for sure. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but
Oh,
I
no,
feel
yeah.
like each therapeutic area has its own nuances.
Mhm.
Something in eye care, like if you go to the eye doctor and they talk about how your vision's 20/20 or something like
Yeah.
that, I'm sure you understand that. But like taking an average of that display, 20/20, it makes no sense. But if you're in the space, you would know that you can convert that to something useful.
Yeah.
And so having knowledge like that in each therapeutic area, I feel like would be is really valuable.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, so it's interesting, and Brad, you mentioned like you've been approached by folks too to say like, hey, I kind of have this idea, I want to run IIT. I'm curious, and maybe we don't really know, but like how much the variability there is between eye care in this space running IITs and like running in like a Brad, if you had like a GI doctor you're working with, like is it going to be the same approach? And sort of thinking about how we deliver care in eye care versus like I have separate insurance, I go to the eye doctor. It is very like a different experience of being like, I'm gonna go into a like medical care. It seems different in some ways as far as like care delivery. I'm assuming it'd be similar, there'd be variation in how research is handled, or is that not accurate? What do we think? I don't know if we have the expertise to know across all of those.
Yeah, personally for me, I don't have experience in other therapeutic areas, but yeah, running IITs, they're private practice, and so they see patients in private practice, and I think that lends itself well to doing these types of studies because you're already seeing patients
Mhm.
on a day-to-day basis, and you're collecting data on the devices and medications that are already being used, and these IITs are studies on stuff that's already approved. So I feel like it's pretty, it's easy if you're already using the devices and the drugs to run one of these trials, because then you're just getting some money kicked in and actually trying to answer a research question
Yeah.
based around these devices. But I can't say if it's the same in other therapeutic areas. If there must be an overlap where in GI with a drug or a new
I would
device.
think, and say we work across just about every therapeutic area. Again, not so much IITs, but it's sort of like you said. I mean, there's therapeutic area expertise that matters, but like a lot of the sort of block and tackle of the administrative regulatory stuff is more or less the same, if that makes sense. So it's same but different, I guess, to put it very imprecisely. I'm curious too, like what are, because again, I'm actually interested by this because like it's IITs seem to me more challenging for private practice. I think it makes more sense from a like, look, they're probably seeing a lot of things that lend itself to the research, but then you've got all the sort of like things that it takes to make that happen, to actually make an IIT happen. So like what are like the most common barriers that keep private practice from doing this?
Right, and I do get what you're saying. When you're running like an industry sponsored trials, they just sort of hand you everything.
Mm-hmm.
They hand you the protocol, they tell you what data to collect, and you send it to them, and then they take it all from there. But when you're in the in an investigator-initiated trial, you're also the sponsor, so you have to come up with the research idea, you have to come up with the protocol, you have to create the informed consent, you have to apply for IRB approval, you have to collect the data, you need the forms to collect all the data on, and so I get what you're saying. I think the biggest barrier is probably having enough time to dedicate to research. So there are these extra steps involved if you want to do your own research projects. So you just have to make sure that you yourself as the investigator have the time to invest in running these trials, and also that your staff has the time if they need to take on any extra responsibilities. If you want to say, have a staff member draft a protocol for you or do the informed consent, they need to have time to do that. And I also think you need to have the space to dedicate at your facility, a place for participants. You need to have a room where if you're still using paper, you got the study binders and everything like that.
Do you think, this is a little bit of an aside, but do you think that investigator-initiated trials tend to use less technology than pharmaceutical-sponsored trials, simply because the site's kind of on the hook? And I can talk about that too, like in terms of like funding these things. I think is another like rabbit hole to go down. But let's start there. Like, do you think these trials tend to be more paper-based, like in general, in your opinion?
In my experience, yes. So just because of what you mentioned, budget. So if you're running an investigator-initiated trials, you could be self-funding, in which case your budget is really restricted. But you could also find an industry partner who's interested in some real-world data for their particular device or drug. So they will give you funding. It's not going to be as much funding as if they were trying to get FDA approval. So you are limited. So in terms of paper, so most of the studies I work with use paper CRFs just because of the burden of the financial burden of trying to use an EDC platform that costs a couple $1,000s a month, and maybe the funding you get from an industry partner is $50,000 or $100,000 or somewhere in that range. So to spend a quarter to a half of your money just on an EDC platform just doesn't make any sense. Something specific in eye care. For how data is collected. There are some electronic systems that can collect like your visual acuity, how well you see,
Sure.
but those also come with a big cost. So for something like an FDA trial, they'll use these systems, but for an investigator-initiated trial, more often than not, they're not being used because of the cost.
Yeah, and to your point, these are generally not INDs, right? These are more real-world data type stuff, which, again, in my experience, and again, I'm curious to hear yours, but like, how often do you find that sponsors are willing to sort of help sponsor that, support it, simply because it is? I mean, it's usually probably at least meaningful data for them. Does that seem more common than not, or do you think it's kind of a little 50-50?
So in terms of an EDC system, sponsors won't
No, yeah, I would just mean more
yeah.
broadly, though, in terms of like funding the whole
Sure.
enterprise, so to speak.
So for kicking in extra funding for like what I mentioned, collecting data with a better platform, because it gives you more accurate data. I think for a larger multi-site investigator-initiated trials, finding an industry partner that's willing to kick in some money to collect better data, you're more likely to get that. But for the smaller studies, it's they usually don't, in my experience. Something I will mention, if you are part of an institution and you're interested in using an EDC system, so REDCap is usually free. So you could use that. I've been lucky enough to find a budget-friendly one for some of the work that I do, and so I've been using that in the last year or so, and it's been going pretty well. So that one, for instance, is a few $100s a month versus a few thousand. So it's much easier to use for these IITs.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I seem to remember REDCap. I think there's a couple out there now that'll do it for free. I mean, even Castor, I think they do some free IIT stuff. So yeah,
for certain types of trials, different companies.
There's tools out there.
Yeah. So you mentioned something that I think is interesting. Like, so when you're talking about these IITs, these investigators, like, what brings them to this point? Like, what are they like? I have a question, or I think I see this. Like, are they just sort of like seeing things in their practice and they're like, you know what, I want to do more of this? Like, how are these people getting into it that you're working with?
I think a lot of it comes from just curiosity. So some of these FDA trials have pretty restrictive inclusion-exclusion criteria, and that's of course warranted because these companies are spending so much money. They want to make sure that they get the right patients for the FDA trials. But when you're on the other end of doing patient care and you have real-world conditions, you want to know, do these things actually work in the real world? So I think there's definitely a deep curiosity these investigators have. They want to see, does this work for my patient population? Because maybe, for instance, like something you're putting in your eye, different ethnicities have different length eyes on average. So maybe you want to see, does this particular device work in my patient population that's a different ethnicity versus the FDA trial, which maybe wasn't
often aren't too representative, as we all know.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I love that. Yeah, again, the whole thing is fascinating to me. The whole, again, like how to incorporate IITs in private practice. So do you find, in terms of like infrastructure in these clinics, you still need somebody to collect data. Research is a little different than, normal care. So there's caveats, there's extra work, there's extra regulatory stuff that goes into it. Generally, do these require, having additional staff? Are you able to sort of convert existing clinic staff into, sort of, makeshift CRCs, so to speak, and how to do that without also driving them out of their minds from doing their day job versus doing research that may not bring any additional compensation? I guess talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, I think because these investigator-initiated trials, they're small trials, and you're probably not running a whole bunch back to back. It makes sense to convert one of your own staff members to be a CRC, to meet with the patients and scheduling and everything like that. But yeah, you'd have to be very careful to pick somebody who is not already overwhelmed. I think if you overwhelm people, you're not going to get a very good result. Certainly, if for specific things, you might want to find some partners if you don't want to do it in house. That could be something like medical writing. If you don't have anybody on staff who has experience with that, I mean, you could spend the time to train them if you felt that was valuable for your company. But I find more often than not, it's usually farmed out to somebody. Same with biostatistics. To do the analysis. Some of these IITs, because they're simpler, you could probably do it in house. If you're doing a single arm, one device, you just want to see, hey, did it work with my patient population? You're just taking the average of a bunch of numbers. You could probably do it in house, but when you start to get to the head-to-head comparisons of two different devices, I feel like you'd really want somebody with experience like a biostatistician to take that on. The IRB part to get the trial up and going, I feel like you could have staff member do that because they're probably already familiar with interacting with the IRB. Just to submit the investigator documents.
Yeah, that process is generally easy enough, and at least here, the two main central IRBs are fairly easy to work with. for the most part. Safe for the most part. I mean, I think if you're coming in cold, like with an IIT as your first thing, that might be a lot potentially for somebody who's got no other experience. Because that's a problem again. Like I've had working on all these clinics, I'll have a doctor occasionally approach me and they'll be like, hey, I've got this idea, to run a, investigator-initiated trial. I think first it is tough if the doctor is not incredibly passionate about it and there's no funding at all. Obviously that could be, potentially challenging or an issue depending on the nature of that clinic or how enterprising, they want to be versus research focused. But then it is like, again, how do you track down biostats or even somebody to write a protocol? In my experience, even at the university, like oftentimes the doctor wasn't sitting down hammering out the protocol on their own without, significant help along the way. Those have been issues like I've seen personally when it comes up. And then especially even if you have partners, again, I think the tough part is like, where's the money come from? Do you see that is that an issue in IITs? Do we see less of it because it's not always like a profitable thing to do? Or again, in my experience too, like sometimes sponsors will pay. How enticing is that, I guess, for private practices?
So most of the ones that I'm involved in do have some money kicking in just because
You're involved.
it is expensive.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, because I'm involved, but I mean, it is expensive, even if you're just paying an IRB and paying patients. If you're paying, $200, $300 a patient, you're seeing 50 patients, or you're paying an IRB $5,000. Yeah. So it can be expensive, but a good place to start for any of these investigators who approach you might be a retrospective trial. If they already have a bunch of patient data, so a retrospective trial, you would just look backwards at data that's already collected. That way you're not, tying up clinic time for people coming in and seeing you. You're not paying the patient a stipend. The IRB fee is a lot less. They're generally just going to give you a waiver of IRB oversight, which is a lot less than a full-blown approval for the trial. So that's a good way to start. But again, they would have to be willing to want to DIY it a little bit if budgets were tight. So they didn't, the protocols are simpler and you can find templates for retrospective trial. And I have templates as well on my website that I can link to if some of your audience members are interested. But that would be my suggestion, is to get your feet wet with a retrospective trial.
Makes sense. So you've been doing this for, you said, 7-8 years or so, and then you have gathered a massive amount of knowledge in this, and then you decided to write a book about it. Talk a little bit about that. What's the book? What prompted it?
Sure. So the book is called Idea to Impact, and I wrote it to help eye care professionals who might have great ideas to be able to take those great ideas and execute their own clinical research study. So I do think that now is a great time to start getting involved in investigator-initiated trials. I think there's a lot of tools that enable us to be a lot smoother, and private practices can get into it. In the book, I outline my blueprint. I call it the lens system. A pun in eye care. There's a pun in the title too. You could tell that I like puns, but so it gives you a framework, gives an investigator a framework to move from their idea to eventually publishing it in a peer-reviewed journal. So I'll run through it. So L, that's launch with focus. So that section is all about coming up with a great research idea, writing a protocol, writing an informed consent form, and applying for IRB approval, getting IRB approval. E is next. So enroll with confidence is the next part. And that involves how to recruit patients and how to retain them. So it's pretty important to have participants if you want to collect data. So that's what that section is about, recruiting and actually keeping people engaged in the trial so they don't drop off. It's pretty heartbreaking to see to have a trial with a large drop off.
I think generally, do you think, like, if I'm assuming, again, correct me if I'm wrong, like in an IIT, like you're probably enrolling your own patients primarily versus, a lot of the investor or pharma sponsored stuff where you might be pulling advertising, maybe pulling people out of wherever you can grab them. So I wonder if there's naturally like some higher retention rates, since generally, again, presumption on my part, but you're enrolling patients that you already have a history with and have been seeing for some time. Is that fair, you think?
So I can't say what the dropout rate is for FDA sponsored trials. I would be curious to know what your experience is, but for these IITs that I'm a part of, it's maybe 10% at the most. It's not usually that high, although it is very study specific.
Sure.
If you have a pretty burdensome visit schedule for patients, you can get higher drop off if you're not compensating people for their time to come into the practice so often.
Yeah, that makes sense. And again, it could be tough depending on what your funding situation might be. So,
of course, what drop off rate do you typically see?
I mean, yeah, I'd say we probably see 10 to 15. I don't know what I was going to just Google what the.
I mean, I would imagine it would depend on like therapeutic area, like the other treatment availability and options. So like how critical is this for care, like for a care path for them? And then probably to your point, like burden of protocol. Like if you're telling someone they might be getting like placebo eye injections, they potentially might not be like jumping to come back in if you're doing this multiple times.
Very fair.
Yeah. Take this with a grain of salt, but at least a quick Google says about roughly 30% is common across clinical trials, which seems high to me, but maybe that's,
I've never
focus on it so much
in an IIT. Even the most burdensome protocols, I've never seen 30%.
Yeah, that seems very high to me, but that was a quick. I think it gave me its AI summary, so I did not dig. So please, nobody come at me later if you see this and be like, "You're an idiot," because it's just what I read.
So what's N?
Sorry. Yeah.
What's N?
So N is thank you. N is notice the insights. So that's all about collecting good data and analyzing it properly. I give in terms of good data, like I mentioned that most of these IITs are still collecting on paper, and if study staff aren't trained properly, you can run into some issues. So one that I talk about in the book is a study staff member who was recording data on sticky notes, and then they were putting it into to a CRF and then tossing it the sticky note. And then when you have to go back later and why is this number this way? Well, then now there's no source document. So it's really about collecting good data and analyzing it properly. And then finally, S, share the results is about getting on stage and sharing your study and your findings with your colleagues and publishing in a peer-reviewed medical journal. I find that's a pretty proud moment for investigators when they see their name in print in a medical journal that they might be reading on a monthly basis that comes in the mail, and they finally get to see their name in print in the journal.
Yeah. So of L, E, N, and S, where do you see folks falling down the most? Like where's the most? Which is the one you see folks struggling with the most?
I think there are issues at every stage. So for the beginning stage. I think I talk about it in the book as well. An example of TIM where they started to collect data for a retrospective study and presented at a conference without first getting IRB approval.
Oops.
So that's of course a big ethical issue, and the data is not usable. Also, something that's becoming more common is having to register the study in clinicaltrials.gov if you want to publish in a medical journal. At least in eye care, more and more medical journals are cracking down that if you haven't submitted and got your study on clinicaltrials.gov around the same time that the first patient is enrolled, they won't publish your study. This is, of course, for a prospective or an ambispective study. So that's becoming an issue. Certainly for recruitment, the biggest issue that I've seen is not compensating patients for their time. So you have a burdensome protocol. Maybe subjects have to come in 3 times a day, but you're not compensating them for their time. Then you can certainly see a pretty large dropout rate. And that's where, at least in my experience, I've seen the highest dropout rates. For data collection, what I mentioned to you, the earlier example of recording data on sticky notes and tossing it out, or I think for investigators that maybe have not been involved in a trial before or investigator-initiated trial, I think there could be a temptation to collect a whole bunch of data. But that could confuse the study question for sure. And once you have all that data, it can be a little overwhelming to know how best to use it to answer your research question.
Yeah, I've seen that in the past where I used to work at the VA, but a lot of investigator-initiated stuff that these neurology group would work on, but they would just be, I feel like at some point they were just collecting spreadsheets of data without like a clear, sometimes research question. And it just became a gigantic spreadsheet of data. Like, what are we doing?
We just want to know. We just
We
want to
want to
know.
know something. We'll
wanna
figure
know.
out what that
We
is.
don't know
later.
what.
Yeah, then certainly come up with a research question, and then come up with your endpoints based on that research question, and then collect data to answer the endpoints.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily go on a I'm not sure what the right word is, but don't just go digging and see what you find.
On a
Have,
fishing trip.
Fishing. That's what I was looking for. Yeah. Thank you.
So how do you see IITs differ in independent practices versus AMCs? Like, where's the variation, or is there?
Can you tell me what an AMC is? I'm not familiar with that.
Academic medical center. It's like an academic location. Okay. It's like a big university, like who's running IITs.
Right.
Is there a big variation in how IITs are present or run, or are they
so
similar?
In my experience, most of the ones that I work on are private practice. Okay. And the ones that are run at an academic institution, it's been burdensome to even get IRB approval. Like I mentioned before, it took 6 months or 12 months to get approval from one. Although for institutions that actually do a lot of research, I've found that there's no real difference between getting the approvals. But I guess it really depends on the institution.
Okay, yeah, I could see that.
So do you think there would be sponsors might be more interested in supporting independent practices who are doing IITs simply because there's less red tape? Like, they can get their data faster, presumably maybe less data. If you're dealing with a really big academic center, they may have access to more patients and more data, but it's going to take 4 times as long to get what you need. Like, so do you think there's an incentive for sponsors to work more closely with community practices, smaller practices?
Yeah, I think speed is a big factor. So the IITs are smaller studies, and so unless you have like a hard to recruit for patient population, I feel like you could do as well, get as many patients in private practice as you could from an institution, but you have the extra layer of the institution on top. So I feel like you're much faster going with a private practice, at least in my experience. But I could tell you these IITs that I work on, the prospective ones, there may be 30 patients, 40 patients.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine there's unless it's something really hard, like I said, to recruit for.
Or something super rare. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. So in that case, then, volume is not necessarily a concern. It seems to make sense from the sponsor side if they're going to help, if they're going to support something like. Right. Well, why wouldn't you potentially look at somewhere you can get it done and faster, and then therefore presumably cheaper if it can get done faster?
Right. And maybe to your point about cheaper, maybe there's less overhead too.
Yes.
In private practice versus an institution.
Yeah, and I think we see that with industry studies too, right? Like, I would imagine it's a very similar if they're looking at their industry trials, like what's the overhead to run at a large center versus someone who could move much more quickly with lower central infrastructure to support. Makes sense.
Right.
Well, yeah, I'm hearing that from a call with the big CRO yesterday, and they're like, we're trying to get into more independent groups because yes, we can go so much faster. It's usually less headache, less people to deal with. It's more centralized. So it's interesting. That's interesting. And again, it's something that I've come across in the last several years. So I may be hitting you up on the side for some for some consulting, because I think it's really interesting to me. And I know that there's a lot of independent sites, sites that listen, sites that are at these conferences. I think it's something that probably does come up regularly. And I'm not familiar with anyone who's done it like a successful clip. So this is interesting that it's like your whole bag, man. I like it.
Yeah, no, like I said, I love working directly with investigators. They're on the front lines. They're getting the real world data. They have insights to, a new treatment comes out and they want to compare it to the current treatment and see, is this better for my patient population? It's and because it's research, it's always something new. So it keeps you interested. I'm sure you find the same thing with your research as well.
So what's like the most fascinating or like ridiculous or interesting like research question that you've seen in one of these IITs you've worked at where you're like, oh damn, that's wild?
I don't know that there's been ridiculous ones, but I do find eye care is very interesting because, so for instance, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term presbyopia, but when you're 40, the lens inside your eye from 40 onwards doesn't work as well, and so you have a hard time seeing things up close, reading or seeing the computer or a smartphone. But a lot of the devices that I work on are trying to help with that. So it's interesting because I'll be there, not in a not too distant future. So it's interesting for me to see, okay, this treatment is maybe better than this one. So if I need something, maybe I should go with this treatment. So it is always interesting because I can relate it to my own care.
Yeah. Okay.
Get that inside knowledge. I like it. Very cool. Anything else, Denali? Got any other specific questions or anything else that you want to talk about?
No, I mean, I think it's been fascinating. I think too, like when we first started chatting about having you on and sort of looking into what you were doing, to Brad's point, like I've really not seen anything like this. Like again, it's normally like in the community, industry sponsored, funded research, or if it's IITs, it's in like the academic setting. It's just an interesting crossover that I've not seen executed at scale successfully. So I find it fascinating.
No, I will say that for somebody who wants to get into it, like I said, the first step would be probably to do a retrospective study. I feel like it's the simplest, it's the easiest way to get your feet wet. If you're interested in doing something that might require a bit more money, then I would reach out to some industry partners. So that would be some of the treatments that you're already using with your patient population. There are industry partners who are interested. I mean, investigators want to show real world data that want to know if something's effective, but I'm sure there's industry partners as well that would love to show that their particular treatment is effective in the real world. So I'm sure you can find willing partners, industry partners to kick in some funding for to do these studies. At least in eye care, there's a lot of the big companies will fund these studies.
Cool.
Yeah, some of the bigger sponsors, like if you look, I mean, they have IIT programs like specifically for people to make submissions because they want to partner up with their doctors using their stuff, so they can continue to get more data. So I think that's interesting, and probably if I had to guess, something that probably gets overlooked like fairly often, that there is potentially some support there.
Yeah, like you said, the industry partners do have whole dedicated teams to doing this as well, and they, at least the ones that I work with in eye care, they'll handhold you through the application process. Especially if it's your first one. So that's always a good place to reach out to go to these forums, and sometimes they even publish the research topics. Hey, we have these following research topics. You can spin off an idea from these general topics and submit it to us, and we'll walk you through the process, and then if it's interesting, then we'll give you money to run it, and that they'll cover the whole thing most times, so you're not necessarily paying anything out of pocket.
Yeah, it starts to look a lot like grant writing from the site side versus industry budgets at that point. But that's, again, been a long time since I did IIT. that was my experience too. Like usually get most everything covered for the most part.
Yeah, cool. I couldn't say. I don't think at least in my experience, that the grant writing process for these industry sponsored trials are as onerous as
no
for trying to get government funding.
Right. No, that's that's a fair statement to make, not to scare people off, because it's not nearly that complex, but having to sort of usually you're sent a budget from a sponsor on our stuff, and you got to write one for yourself if you're going to do investigator-initiated. So just slight difference there. Well, very cool. Where can people find you online or reach out to you, and where can they find your book?
So on LinkedIn, you can hit me up. It's BAJLL-SENGI. So that's the name of my company, Senge. You could also hit me up at info@sengeclinical.com. And the book, if you go to sengeclinical.com/book, the books. There'll be a universal book link, so you can get it anywhere books are sold. If you want to, find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, it's you can just follow that along, and certainly reach out to me. Email if anybody has any questions about these IITs. I'm always happy to answer questions, or if you're looking for templates or anything to help you along for your first few ones, I'm happy to provide those as well.
Very cool. We'll make sure and put that info in the show notes. I know Denali wants to ask you about the origin of your company name.
Yeah, I was Googling it, and I was I'm gonna let you talk, and then I'll say why.
Sure. So, I mean, the quick answer is it's my wife's favorite animal. So, if you look up Rufus Senge, RUFUS SENGI, they're these little critters that live in Africa, and what they do is they meticulously prepare these racetracks. So they remove grass and other debris from these racetracks, and they run along these racetracks to escape from their predators. And so they run really fast, and they keep a map of these racetracks in their mind, so they know where to go to run away from the predators. And anyway, it's her favorite animal, because if you look at a picture, they're pretty adorable, especially the small little ones. When they're born, they look exactly like their mothers, and they actually have nipples in their shoulders to feed the little ones.
Interesting.
Just maybe a strange aside, but I think the creatures are very interesting. But yeah, the name comes from the fact that it's my wife's favorite animal.
Okay, because I was like, I feel like that's the elephant shrew, and I was like, how is this? And I was like, is it, or is it just? Is there something different? So I love
it's the elephant shrew. Yeah,
I love that.
Gotta have fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, she loves vague animal facts, obscure animal facts. So that all fits in.
Yeah. If there's one very narrow part of trivia that I can do, and it's animal facts. I won't remember anyone's name. If I see you at a conference, there's a likelihood that I recognize you. I have no idea what your name is. I can't keep that. It's a sieve. But animal facts, steel trap.
Well, can I ask if you have one off the top of your head that you'd like to share?
An animal fact. I mean, one of my favorite ones is that wombats have square poops. I think that's fascinating. They're one of the only animals that does. I think that's just a wild one.
Thank you for sharing.
Not too sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the one that popped up. So,
all right, well, I think that's a great send out. Talking about wombat poop. So, Dr. Hall, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you. It was a pleasure speaking with both of you.
Yeah, you as well.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to Note to File. We're committed to continuing to bring you independent and unfiltered coverage of the clinical trial industry.
We want to talk about what you want to hear. So if you have something on your mind, hit us up at notetofilepodcast.com.